everyone, it's Meg, and today I'm going to be sharing with you guys some books I have read recently. Again, it feels like I seem to be filming these a lot, especially over the past couple of months, but I guess I have been reading more. So I have about 7 books to talk to you guys about today, and I have a mixture of books as always, and also this video includes my TBR and wrap up, should I say, for the Backlist Readathon and also the Animal Crossing Readathon. So I'll share with you guys my thoughts on all the books that I read for then. But without further ado, let's get into the video. First book that I have on this list is The 24-Hour Cafe by Libby Page. This was one of my most anticipated releases for this year. I heard about it when Em was talking about it on her channel for her anticipated releases, and I had to read it. And it is basically a slice of life book about what it is like to be in this 24-hour cafe in London. It's about the waitresses and about the customers that come in and just what a slice of life is like in this cafe. And I wanted to read this book because I also work in a cafe, and this is our 2 main characters who are the waitresses, called Mona and Hannah. They're 30 in this book, but they've been working there since in their 20s, so it's kind of, even though they're a bit older than me, they are kind of in the similar age of they are creatives in London trying to find their way in the world and succeed, and it goes through all their troubles and kind of their anxieties and worries about whether they are ever going to make it or when they should give up. And it was a book I knew I had to read, and I did really enjoy this book, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought it would, probably for the factor that I read it during a reading slump, which was not a clever idea. It took me around 3 weeks to read this book because it was one of those stages where I just didn't know what to read. I had no idea, like, I kept stopping and starting, or if I read too much then it would go into a slump. So I feel like it wasn't the right time to pick this book up, so I might have to reread it at some point because I wanted to fully annotate it, and I've done it a bit but I've not annotated it a lot, so wasn't the best time to read it, and I feel like that did hinder my enjoyment of it. But it is still a book that I really enjoyed, and like I said, I loved getting to know the characters and their struggles and their backstories. And also it made me like notice little things about working in a cafe, like how as a barista or a waitress you notice things that other people don't. You do a lot of people watching and you kind of get to know your local customers and what they like, and just all those little nitty bits that not everybody else seems to notice, which is really nice. And one of the main things about in this book that it covers is female friendships, and the friendship between Mona and Hannah, and kind of how strong their bond is, and also how certain aspects of their life, certain things that happen in their life can hinder it. And I really love that. I feel like that's also talked about in Libby's debut, The Lido. I feel like that's a topic that she likes to discuss a lot in her books, so I really love that aspect of the book as well. And one of the things I really enjoyed the most about this book was the writing style, as Libby's, I wouldn't quite describe her writing as lyrical, but it is very pretty, it's very different, it's unique. It was like a breath of fresh air when I was reading this book, and the writing style, like the way she described things, was so different. I had never read a book with her sort of descriptive style before, which I really enjoyed. So that's definitely one of my favourite things about this book, and one of the things that I took away, as I feel like that could be definitely an inspiration for when I eventually write my own book. And overall this was just a really lovely read. I could relate to it a lot about kind of the dreams that these waitresses had, how they want more than the life that they have at the cafe, and the struggles that they go to being a creator who is trying to make it in the world and make a living from it. And that's something that I could really relate to, and also the factor of, especially Mona, how determined she is to not fail. She wants to make it in her career, she wants to make it as a dancer, and I just really enjoyed that. So I feel like even though these characters are in their 30s, if you are in your 20s and you are feeling a bit lost, I feel like you will really enjoy this book. I really, really enjoyed this book, even though I shouldn't have read it during a reading slump because that was not a good idea. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and I feel like if I reread it again later on, I don't know if I'll reread it again this year, but at some point I would definitely like to reread it, and I feel like I would be able to enjoy it a lot more as long as I don't read it when I'm in a reading slump again, because that was not a good idea. Next up, I have Emma by Jane Austen. I wasn't planning on picking another Jane Austen book up for a while, but obviously if you guys don't already know, the new film adaptation for Emma has recently come out, and I went to go and see it maybe within the first week or two of its release, and I did enjoy it, but there were some bits that I didn't quite understand what was going on, and there were some holes. So I decided to pick the book up, and I actually went between reading it physically and listen to the audiobook, or reading whilst listening to the audiobook, so following along with the audiobook, and it was such an enjoyable experience. For some reason this was one of the least favourite books that I was looking forward to. I've never read it before, but it was just one that I wasn't interested in, and I have no idea why, because it's one of the more comedic novels that Jane Austen has written, and just I feel like it also helped because I listened to the audiobook, because even though Jane Austen is one of my favourite writers, sometimes it takes me a while to kind of process her writing. I feel like listening to the audiobook definitely helped, especially when I was reading along, because it made me understand the language a bit more and be more invested in the story. And I just really, really enjoyed it. It was just such a pleasure to read, and this has definitely become one of my favourite Jane Austen books, along with Persuasion and Pride and Prejudice. This is definitely one of the tops that I've read of hers so far. I just love the characters and their relationships and the story, and I also really enjoyed the narrator who did this. The narrator that did the audiobook that I listened to for this was called Juliet Stevenson, and I have listened to her audiobook narration for Northanger Abbey, and I think she's done the rest of the Jane Austen novels as well, and I really enjoyed it. It's a really lovely audiobook because the voices are distinct, you kind of know who's talking, because there are quite a few characters in Emma, but you can really distinct, especially people like Miss Bates, she captures her so perfectly, with all her little tangents, and I really, really enjoyed that. So it's just a really enjoyable read. I am so glad that I got to it a lot sooner than I thought. And I did enjoy the film adaptation. I feel like I do prefer the book, because I went to go see the film again with my mum because she hadn't seen it yet after reading the book. So the book is definitely my favourite of the two, but again, the film was good, and this was just such an enjoyable read. So I will definitely be rereading this at some point, and of course I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. Now we are starting on all of the books that I read for the Backlist and the Animal Crossing Readathon, and the first book that I have, continuing with the ostentatious theme, is Dangerous Alliance by Jennieke Cohen. This is a book that I received in a book box club for December, and I was really in the mood to read another ostentatious style book after reading Emma, and I actually managed to weave this into my TBR for the Readathons last minute. And this basically follows a girl named Vicky who lives on an estate with her father and her mother, and then one day she has an older sister who is married, and then one day her sister turns up and her husband has been mistreating her. So basically Vicky has to marry in order to save her family's estate. And there is a lot more to that, but there are all these little mishaps, these mystery. There's a bit of a mystery that's going on where things keep happening to Vicky, and she doesn't know what's quite is going on, so she has to figure it out. And this was a book that I didn't actually know what I was going into, because even though I read the synopsis, I feel like it's one of the synopses where you read it but you don't still understand what was going on. But the synopsis that I gave you, I feel like is a bit more simple and you can understand it a bit more. And I really enjoyed this book. I ended up about halfway through reading it, I discovered the audiobook. So I listened to some of the audiobook, and then sometimes I would read along with the audiobook. And it was a really enjoyable experience. The narration and the audiobook in general was very good. And it took me a while to get into it. I feel like the writing style was just something that I wasn't quite used to, or it was a bit different. It just wasn't clicking with me, but I did get into it eventually, and I really enjoyed our characters, especially Vicky. And this book, I didn't know what to expect going into it. It was a lot more action-packed than I thought it was going to be. I thought it'd be a bit more gentle, seeing as it has like an ostentatious vibe, but it didn't, which is not a bad thing. It's just I wasn't expecting as much action and stuff that was going on in it. But I did end up enjoying that factor. And I feel like my most favourite part about this book is the history behind it, about the history of what it's like to be a woman in the 1800s and what it is like to be a woman at that time in terms of like marriage and responsibility. And it goes through about divorce as well. Like, if you read this book, there is an author's note at the back about the history of being a woman and about marriage and divorce in the time that this book was set. And please, if you have this book, go and read the author's note after you have read it. It is really, really good. I definitely feel like it shines a lot of light on it. I don't know whether Jenicky is a historian or if she just really enjoys history, but I feel like it was very well researched, and it's something that I don't really know a lot about, like kind of like divorce, especially at that time, because it was a lot more difficult, because obviously a woman was basically a property of a man, so the woman didn't have many rights, so it was quite hard to have a divorce if it's something that the woman wanted. But it was really interesting and eye-opening, which I really enjoyed about that. And I just love how independent Vicky is as well, our main character, how roughy tufty she is, which even that is definitely not seen as proper in the time that this book is set. But it was just a really surprising yet enjoyable read, and I'm definitely glad that I got to it. I got to it sooner than I thought I would, which I'm really glad about. And if you have this book on your shelf, make sure you pick it up and let me know what you think. So in the end, I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I have a poetry collection, which is Scaried Hill by Owen Shears. This, at the moment, is the only poetry collection that I have on my shelf that I've had for the longest and have not read. And it intimidated me a bit, mainly because it just looks like one of those books, or collections should I say, where I feel like I'm not going to click with the writing. But the writing was actually my favourite part of this collection, and this is kind of poems about beginnings and endings and putting togethers and breaking up and falling apart. It's really hard for me to describe what it is, but I feel like you have to read it to understand, because Scaried is kind of based on a Welsh derivation, and which basically means a divorce or separation. So it's kind of about those sort of things, like, you know, like putting together, falling apart, all that sort of thing. So I ended up enjoying this a lot more than I thought I would. Like I said, the writing was what I enjoyed most about this novel. I feel like it's kind of Mary Oliver-esque, like that style of writing. It is fairly easy to understand. There's nothing too flowery about it to the point where you don't really know what's going on, especially if you are not like super into poetry. And I liked how much nature and animals played a part in this novel, as I wasn't expecting that either, but Owen is from Wales, so I guess he might have been from the more rural part of Wales, which is why there's so much nature that is included in this, which I really enjoyed. But apart from the writing and kind of the fact that nature was involved in this book, I found it quite boring. I didn't really feel much when I was reading it. I love to feel something, especially when I'm reading poetry. You want to be able to feel something. But I didn't really feel anything, and I got a bit bored to the point where some poems I just skim over some of the lines because I wasn't a massive fan and I just got a bit bored. But I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars in the end. Like I said, I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed the writing style, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. But in terms of kind of like how it made me feel, and it just made me feel a bit bored, to be honest with you. But I still enjoyed it. I'm still glad that I finally got to read it. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I still really enjoyed it, but I just got a little bit bored as I was going through it. And the final physical read that I have in this video is Finale by Stephanie Garber. This book I actually started back in October, and I got 3/4 of the way through and then I put it down. Not for any reason because I wasn't enjoying it, it's probably just because I'm not a fantasy reader. I don't really read a lot of fantasy, so it's probably getting quite a lot because I read another fantasy book, the second book in this series, not long before I picked this book up, so it's probably just a bit much for me because I'm not used to it. So I decided to pick it up and finish it off for the Readathons, and I'm really glad I did. And obviously I can't talk much about the series because of spoilers, but I started the series when it first came out, which was 2017 I believe, when Caraval came out, and Caraval was like the second fantasy book I'd ever read, and I feel like out of the 3 books, the second book, which is Legendary, is my favourite. And I enjoyed all of the books. I feel like I'd have to go and read Caraval again because it was a long time since I read it, and I'm still very new to fantasy, but I was even more new to it back then. But I liked how it wrapped up. I didn't really know what to expect, but it's just a really enjoyable story, and I really enjoy the characters and the relationships and the romance and the world and the magic and just all of it. It was just a really enjoyable read, and I'm really glad that I found a fantasy series that I enjoy because, like I said, I don't read a lot of fantasy. I feel like I find it hard to find books that are fantasy that I'm interested in, but I'm really glad that I finally got to finish this trilogy, and I gave finale 4 out of 5 stars. Now we are on to the final 2 books that I read during the readathon, and next up we have If I Was Your Girl by Meredith Russo. This is a book I've had on my TBR forever, since I discovered BookTube, since I started my channel. It has been on there for years, and I finally decided to pick it up for the Backlist readathon, and I was going to read it physically because I was going to get it from the library. That didn't end up happening, but I listened to the audiobook instead, and I didn't know what to expect again. I knew that this book was about a trans main character. That is literally all I knew about it, and so I didn't know what to expect, and for some reason I thought that the author was British, or that the book was British, and it wasn't. I don't know why I thought that. It's just something that I thought because I always saw it in like British bookshops, which obviously doesn't mean that it is British, but for some reason I thought that, so there you go, that was a surprise. I really did end up enjoying the story. Like I said, I genuinely didn't know what to expect about what was going to happen, and I can't obviously speak for the representation, but it is an own voices novel because Meredith is also trans, and I feel like it is a very important book. Like a lot of books that deal with the subject, it's very important, especially from a known voices perspective. And I enjoyed our main character, I enjoyed the love interest, I thought he was really nice. But the one thing that really surprised me about this book, because I was listening to it, I knew I was near the end of the book and I was working on my computer, and then the book, like there's a chapter and then it ended, and I was like, oh, okay, because the book has quite an open ending, and if you guys don't know already, I'm a bit funny about open-ended books. I'm not keen usually. Like, I know obviously not all books should be wrapped up pretty in a parcel, especially this sort of book and the sort of story that it was about, but I don't know, it was just such a shock because I wasn't concentrating about how much I had left on the audiobook. So yeah, that was a surprise. I wasn't expecting that. But I don't know, I don't hate the ending, but it's just I'm not generally a big fan of books that have open endings, because I want to know a bit more sometimes, you know. But I did really enjoy it. I think it is an extremely important read, and if you have been wondering about picking up this book, definitely go and pick it up. And I'll definitely be picking up Birthday by Meredith also. I've heard so many good things about that book, so I'm really looking forward to getting to that at some point. But overall I gave If I Was Your Girl 4 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I have on this list is Nothing by Annie Barrows. I was really looking forward to reading this book when I discovered it on Scribd, because Annie Barrows is one of the co-authors of the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, which is one of my favourite books of all time. I love it with all of my heart. And this story is basically about two girls named Frankie and Charlotte, and it's basically about how boring their lives are and them documenting it basically, and basically they're meant to see how non-boring their lives actually are. And I probably made that sound really boring. The concept when I read the synopsis sounded really interesting, but when I was listening to it, I listened to it in one go yesterday from when I'm filming this when I was at work, and it was literally about nothing. I don't know whether it's because I was like working and I was cleaning and stuff like that, so I couldn't hear everything that the audiobook was saying, but like I just wasn't a fan. It was a bit boring. I wasn't a fan of the main characters. I found them extremely immature. Like, to be honest, the characters, they're 15 years old, so you can only expect a certain amount of maturity, but like I just found it a bit whiny and a bit juvenile and a bit, I don't know if whiny is the right word, but you know what I mean, just very kiddie-like and boring, really. It is literally about nothing. There's not really much that happens in this book. It's just your average teenage life, and I don't feel like there was much that really added to the story. And also I'm guessing there were different perspectives. There was definitely two perspectives between Frankie's perspective and Charlotte's, and I feel like there was one perspective of both of the girls, like, you know, of the narrator talking about the girls. And I don't know whether it's because I was listening to the audiobook and not reading it physically, but it kind of kept switching between them, and kept getting mixed up about who was who, and then something else appeared and I was like, oh okay, where did that come from? And yeah, I'm rather disappointed in this book, to be honest with you. I was really looking forward to it, especially because it was written by an author who I have read a book from previously and really, really loved. But yeah, rather gutted that I didn't like it, not gonna lie. I wish I had, because I feel like it did have a lot of potential, but it just didn't work out. And I guess also it's the younger side of YA, so obviously I'm a bit older, so I wouldn't really relate to it as much. But yeah, rather disappointed in this book, not gonna lie, and I gave it a 2.5 out of 5 stars, which is probably the lowest I've ever rated a book without like rating it and then going back and changing the rating. So 2.5, that's my lowest read that I've had so far this year, which is very disappointing, but I don't know, maybe I will read something else from Annie at some point in the future and hopefully I will enjoy that more. So there you have it, guys. Those are all the books that I have read recently. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and let me know in the comments a book that you have read recently, or if you've read any of the books that I've mentioned in this video, because obviously I would love to know as always. If you like this video, then please make sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more bookish videos from me, then make sure you hit that subscribe button and little bell icon so you'll be noted every time I post a new video. As always, I will leave links to my social media along with links to my Goodreads in the description down below for you guys. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!